Good morning, everybody, to this Academy of Urbanism online event, Beyond the Buzz, all about the post-engagement delivery of collaborative placemaking, charrettes, and the like. I'm delighted to be asked to chair this morning. It's the first time I've chaired online, actually. And I think I was listening to a colleague not that long ago saying I'm not terribly nervous when I stand up at the podium, but I found it quite a nervous occasion to be chairing online. And I have to say I feel a little bit of that myself this morning. It's quite frisson of stage fright. Anyway, so many of you I recognize, many of you know me. For those of you who don't, I'm Professor of Urbanism and Landscape at the Glasgow School of Art, and last year I was asked to become Glasgow City Urbanist. We've got a very full event this morning, so without further ado, I think I'll rattle through these introductory slides on housekeeping. The first thing I think we must do is thank JTP for their sponsorship of the event today. I think that has been, without doubt, hugely helpful, and although I'll do thanks at the end, I do think we need to thank not only JTP but also Charles and also Husam in particular for all of the work they've put into making this happen. Thank you, Rachel. If you are concerned in any way about having your image captured, please switch your video off. We are recording this so that it can go onto the Academy's website. I suppose we're all very used to having our image captured in almost every way, every day, everywhere. And I really can't imagine the sort of computers that one needs to actually review all of those and the algorithms. The chat is running. Colleagues Heather, Stephen will be feeding through things to me as well to help me facilitate the discussions as we work our way through the process. Next slide, please. And as ever with the Academy, there is many and different ways for you to share your excitement and enjoyment of participating in an Academy event on social media. So as I've said, we've got a packed program this morning. And just before we get started, I wonder if you will indulge me as chair if we share a moment by video with you. Just recently, a very distinguished colleague passed away, David Lewis from Pittsburgh, Carnegie Mellon University. And I wanted to mark his passing and just show you this clip from the American Institute of Architects' appreciation of David a couple of years ago.
They held interviews for architects in this schoolhouse. I had my projector and my slides, and I didn't know what to expect. The schoolroom was full of people, and they were all African Americans. And as I walked in through the door, there were two African American gentlemen standing at the door, and one said to the other, "Here we go again, another whitey." And so I got up on the stage and I said, "Well, I'm not just a whitey, I'm a South African." Well, you could have heard a pin drop. I mean, this was the height of apartheid. And then I said, I'd like anybody in this room to stand up who's been exiled from their country for the fight against racial injustice. And at that moment, a little old lady began to struggle out of her seat. And I thought, oh my God, she looked so fierce. Then she turned to everybody and she said, "We don't want to see any more slides. Every architect we've looked at is qualified. We found the man we want. We don't need to see his slides. We know he's qualified, he wouldn't be here." And we got the job.
Thanks very much, Rachel. And thank you to all our colleagues. I just wanted to take a moment to share that with you. David Lewis and his colleagues, he's a founder of Urban Design Associates. A number of us have had the opportunity to work with UDA. Way back in the 1960s, although that was a story about the 1980s, he kicked these things off. And Joel was reminding me earlier on this morning that Dave was a very modest man. He didn't really want to be, in Joel's words, memorialized. But nonetheless, he had a huge impact on what we all do and what we're about to talk about today. And it also sets up very nicely the inheritance that we enjoy in this area of work from our colleagues in the United States. And a very warm welcome to all of our colleagues in the United States who are joining us today, and indeed to some of them who have got up exceptionally early. Those who are on Eastern Standard Time or Eastern Daylight Time. If there's anybody from Central Time or Pacific Time, I'm not sure they've gone to bed yet to join us today, so we're indebted to them. In just a couple of minutes later on in the program, we'll hear from a number of speakers in the UK. But the first part of our program this afternoon, is to hear from colleagues in the United States. And in a few minutes, we'll hear from Erin, a colleague of Joel with the American Institute of Architects, and Jennifer from Baltimore Community Neighbourhood Design Center. But first, I'd like to hand over to Joel, who will take us back and set the scene for some of these incredible events and interesting things that have happened. So over to you, Joel, and welcome.
Thanks very much, Brian. And as the slides are coming up, I just want to say what a great opening, because it does tie together our transatlantic relationship, that film. Many of you will know that in the 1980s, David Lewis collaborated with the great John Thompson, the founder of AoU, on an event called the Remaking Cities Congress or Conference in the 80s that Prince Charles chaired, looking at post-industrial cities. And in that process, they transferred some ideas around community process that John then adapted and that JTP continues today. Charles Campion has a great book about all the processes happening around the world that are based in these universal values around democratic process. So it's great to continue that conversation with you all this morning. And of course, we're talking about delivering on the promise. Every time we work in communities, there's an implicit or explicit promise that a better future can be achieved if we work together and we work differently than we have in the past. And this blurred image here is an illustration of that. It's citizens physically participating in the redesign of their high street. And that's the kind of different that I'm talking about. Next slide, please. And it's important that we not underestimate this historic moment that we're in. All of the key questions facing our communities, from climate change to inequality to this pandemic, they all require public participation for us to succeed at scale, which means they all require some public conversations. This photo is just a few days old from our newest public space in Washington, D.C., Black Lives Matter Plaza. The street mural, you know, you can see with a satellite, it's very impressive scale, but the more powerful thing are the thousands of individual posters that have been hung facing this plaza, representing, you know, the public hunger and yearning to take on systemic change right now, to have these sometimes difficult conversations, and an awareness and readiness to engage. So this is our moment as professionals to be relevant, to demonstrate our relevance, to engage our communities, and to apply technical expertise, you know, in combination with community values and aspirations to achieve the future that we want. Next slide, please. And ironically, you know, the last time the United States had a big conversation like this in the civil rights era, it actually gave birth to the program that I represent, AIA's Design Assistance Program. It's a public service program. Communities apply for assistance. We build an interdisciplinary national team that goes to work directly with the community. They're not from that area. They're not being paid. They're not developing business. And they don't have a client. They serve the public interest. So their job is to observe local conditions, learn what the community values and aspirations are, and then apply their professional expertise in the public interest. Next slide, please. And so when we talk about implementation, you know, and the idea that we're going to achieve a new outcome that we haven't achieved previously, of course, we have to talk about different models and different approaches. These are two quotes that we often hear in communities. The first is, you know, hey, we're a unique community. Ideas that work elsewhere may not work here. Always valid, always true. Every community is a complex combination of geographies, histories, traditions, economies, demographics, right? And so it requires a unique approach, a customized approach that both reflects that community and has to involve that community if it's going to be sustainable. The second thing they always say is, please, we don't need another plan. We have plenty of plans here. They all sit on the shelves, right? We have shelf plans. We need implementable, actionable strategies that can get us where we want to go. Next slide, please. And there are really four things about city building that we need to improve upon in the United States. One is interjurisdictional cooperation, especially at the regional scale, and working across agencies in an interdisciplinary fashion, you know, getting beyond our professional silos. This response to the pandemic has been a perfect illustration of how things are not working the way they need to be now and require, you know, change on our part. And it has to be democratic, right? We have to get citizens involved in these critical conversations. We all need to become citizen urbanists, if you will, right? I love the AoU because it provides an umbrella of urbanism that we can all engage in a conversation about the future of cities, regardless of our professional background or where we're from. And we need an approach to cities that reflects that kind of thinking. And most importantly, we need to build community at every stage of the process, right? We need to build the foundational relationships that give us civic health and civic capacity, the ability to be successful with taking on some of this big public work. Next slide, please. And this may be a no-brainer, but implementation has to be a part of the process. You know, we like to talk in planning about having a process to produce a document of some kind or a set of policies. And I like to use this illustration because it is a hand-drawn, decades-old process diagram for our process at AIA. It's got plenty of flaws, but the thing that I like about it is the actual charrette event, the root out event, the team visit there, is just a moment, and it's the beginning of a process. It's about getting properly organized to take on the public work of that community, implementation moving forward. So it's all about having that planning process be a part of a larger process, which is achieving, you know, what our community aspirations are. Next slide, please. And then final sort of big thought about how we change our orientation to how we implement these ideas. You know, most communities today are that image on the left, right? Especially the smaller towns, when we go to work with them, it's, you know, how can we get this one big transformational investment that's going to change our outcomes across the board, right? And so those things require incredibly sophisticated financing politics, partnerships, they require years of time. And often what happens in the interim is nothing, right? And you get something like, hey, we got a pandemic and our economics have changed and the bottom falls out of these massive projects. So we like to talk about flipping that script with a community and getting everyone engaged in this sort of snowball effect. We had a community on the 20th anniversary of its process actually call it the snowball effect. And what I mean by that is starting with small, very visual, tangible projects that can happen literally the day after a process, right? Volunteer driven. And they are all connected to that larger vision and some of those larger investments that we want, but we're starting what is feasible today and building momentum at every stage, right? Every stage. And so, when you get down the path with this, you build so much momentum that those big transformational investments not only become possible, but really feasible. And we've seen that in countless communities. My partner, Erin Simmons, will be talking about some of those in her presentation this morning. And the same community that called it the snowball effect on the 20th anniversary of their process wrote an open letter to us and said, 20 years ago, your ideas seem like dreams. Now we are living those dreams. And you can't get a better testimonial than that. That's the kind of implementation we're talking about. And it requires everyone across the board. It's not something that just requires the public sector or private sector. We're talking about the entire community across the board. I'll stop there, and I look forward to a great dialogue this morning. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Joel. Could I, just at this point in time, remind everybody that chat is open, and could I ask you to please hit the chat room and with your questions. The wonderful Heather Claridge, our colleague here in Scotland, is visible somewhere there, and she's assembling all of that, passing it on to me. I don't know, we've got a big program, if we will manage to get everybody speaking this morning who would like to. I'd very much like to try and stimulate conversations between the speakers as much as between speakers and participants, if that's at all possible. So just before we move on to Erin and to Jennifer, Joel, I wonder from your perspective, I know that you do a lot of reflection in your role as Senior Director with AIA. Are there transcendental qualities from the early work that David Lewis and others put together? I mean, we will include the link to that AIA film. It's only 15 minutes. I do recommend to everybody take a look at it. What comes across in that is David's humility and his feel for community and the importance of designing programs to assist communities. And it seems to me that there are some things in what we do are timeless, but at the same time, other things change according to the circumstances. And I know we're going to hear a bit more about that from Erin and from Jennifer. But Joel, in your reflection, are there some things? I mean, I think you hinted at it there in your presentation. There are some givens we need not question, whereas there's other things we do need to be adept at changing. Sorry, go ahead.
Absolutely. You saw it there at the end of that film clip. The title of that film is also the name of the firm that David co-founded, Urban Design Associates, right? And so not a firm named after, the last names of its founders, but after an idea that everyone is an associate in the urban design process. That's what I mean when I refer to, citizen urbanists. We all need to develop a bit of a fluency about what we're facing in our communities and how we're going to participate in solving our key issues. And that idea from way back in the 1960s, I think it was 63 when they founded that firm, is a universal value that is ever more important now. We're having these big conversations in the US professionally about top-down approaches. You know, so much conversation right now with the pandemic of, oh, this is an opportunity to, you know, the war on cars to the next level and redesign our cities while, you know, everyone is at home. And outside of a public conversation or a notion of what the public wants. And, you know, those are mistakes. Those are mistakes. You know, we have to have these conversations publicly. We have to get the public involved and informed about what the choices are. And, you know, they're going to have to be involved through behavioral changes, through how they participate, and what a lot of these solutions are. So that idea is always going to be present and important. Thanks
so much, Joel. And we've got one or two killer questions coming in from, I see Kevin Murray's now exercised his fingers this morning, and I'm gonna ask that question of our three American colleagues, actually, once Erin and Jennifer have had the opportunity to speak. But there's a very interesting question from Kevin, and there's a very interesting one as well from another colleague here, Michelle McGuckin, who I got the opportunity to work with. Michelle has a role up here in Caledonia that is a regional role, and she wants to ask a question about the regional dimension to some of this work. And I think that's very interesting, because for those of us who are old enough to remember it, of course the UDAT was also the RUDAT, which had the regional in the word as well. But let's save that for a bit of discussion a little later on, and now move across and welcome Erin. Erin, would you like to take us through your key points this morning? A fantastic title slide there, Erin. The engrossed nature of young people in their place. You can't get a better image than that. Erin, nice to hear you.
Thanks so much. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us, and thanks for inviting your American colleagues to participate in this as well. So since Joel gave you some background and context about the AI's DAT process, I'm going to provide you with some case studies to illustrate how these efforts have actually been implemented over the years. Next slide, we're going to start with Santa Fe, New Mexico. So it's the second oldest city in the United States, so it has a long and pretty varied history, but by the early 1990s, the strain of growth and its development as a major tourist destination had led to high land values, the loss of affordable housing, and sort of an overall change in the character of the community. In the mid-90s, a private developer proposed a master plan for a mixed-use development of the historic rail yard district, and he did not bother actually involving any of the residents in that plan. As you can imagine, people were a little angry about that, and so after an outcry, the locals ultimately rejected that master plan. That led to the city then partnering with the Trust for Public Land to purchase the rail yard property, and the civic leaders of the city ended up conducting a 14-month planning process that culminated with a DAT process in 1997. Ultimately, over 6,000 people participated directly in informing the elements of the plan that DAT team and that the civic leaders came up with. The DAT recommended forming a nonprofit organization that would hold a master lease for the city of that property. They suggested that all the old buildings be saved as opposed to tearing down, which was in the original proposal that everyone disliked so much. They suggested supporting the existing businesses and keeping them there for the residents who actually lived there. They designated large swaths of land as open parks, space, trails, and they suggested a major portion of the property be used for public and semi-public events and community spaces. I don't know if anyone here has actually been to Santa Fe, but today the rail yard is a very vibrant multi-use space that preserves a lot of the industrial heritage that people were so concerned about keeping. They even reopened the historic rail depot that is still there on the property, and it now serves as the northern terminus of New Mexico's commuter rail system. So they actually brought it back to its original point. And the area itself is now a huge draw for both residents as well as tourists all over the country and the world. Moving on a little bit further west to Portland, Oregon on the next slide. In the 1980s, the Pearl District neighborhood was a derelict warehouse district with rampant vacancy. Pretty much no one was there, no coherent identity, and for the most part was considered by the residents of the city as an abandoned place. No one went there, there was no reason to go there. In 1983, again, the city decided to bring in a DAT team to work with the community on a vision for the future. The major recommendation that came out of that effort was the fact that they should keep the buildings. Originally, people thought, let's just raise the whole place, let's tear these buildings down. And someone said, no, the historic fabric is amazing. You need to keep this and work with it. So that led to the city leaders and the developers creating a working collaboration for the redevelopment of the district. Their first move involved the city tearing down a viaduct that had divided the neighborhood from the rest of the city. So they removed that physical barrier. The developers then agreed to build a minimum of 87 housing units per acre throughout the district. And they said that if the city would commit to actually building a streetcar line to connect that neighborhood with the rest of the city, they would actually up the ante and build more units per acre. They also committed to building 3 new city parks, and they pledged that 30% of the housing would be affordable. For those of you who've ever been to Oregon, I'm guessing you've probably been to the Pearl District. Today, it's widely recognized as one of the most vibrant and amazing neighborhoods in the United States, and it's held up as a global model for that post-industrial revitalization of a neighborhood. Moving on, but staying on the west coast of the United States, by the early 2000s, this very small port town of Port Angeles, Washington, was also suffering from declining neighborhoods, declining downtown. Theirs mostly tied to the declining natural resources industry. It was a mill town originally. In 2009, Port Angeles decided to hold a DAT to focus on downtown revitalization and specifically on waterfront revitalization. They had a waterfront that was completely cut off from the rest of the city, and the residents weren't really able to go down there due to its post-industrial status. So we held a 3-day process there. At the conclusion of that, city staff picked through the team's recommendations, drew out every single one of the actual actionable recommendations, and then conducted a survey at another public meeting to allow the community members to actually vote on the prioritization of those recommendations and implementation items. So 2 weeks after the SDAT team presented the community with more than 30 recommendations, we were busy on our 3 days there. The PA Forward Committee unanimously agreed to recommend 10 of those items for immediate action, and they got started the next day, basically. One of the first major efforts involved volunteers giving 43 downtown buildings an immediate facelift using donated paint, materials, and all volunteer labor. The momentum and success of that community-driven effort then led to a formal facade improvement program, as well as a number of other endeavors to go ahead and revitalize the downtown. The city also moved forward with a substantial public investment in its waterfront, which again had been basically cut off from people. People just didn't go down there. There was no reason to. That development then in turn inspired new partnerships and a lot of private investment. Within 5 years, Port Angeles had over $100 million in new investment downtown, including an award-winning waterfront. And it's probably good to point out that this was in the middle of the Great Recession of the 2000s. So the fact that they managed to do that was pretty remarkable in and of itself. Today, major new public facilities are still breaking ground on the waterfront. They've got an art center that is under construction right now, and they also have a cultural center that honors the indigenous people of the area that I believe has already been opened or is in the process of being built. Moving on to another industrial city on the next slide, Helper, Utah was another thriving industrial community until the natural resources economy basically went away. Resulted in a great deal of depopulation of a once thriving town, extreme poverty. The population of the town is only something like 2,000 people, and almost 13% of the population was living below the poverty line as of 2017, 2016. In September of 2017, Helper hosted a DAT to build a community-driven strategy for its downtown. Over 200 people in a town of 2,000, so pretty good numbers there. Ended up participating with us and came out and spoke with us. And the team ultimately ended up delivering an implementation strategy that focused on strengthening the public realm, activating downtown, and enhancing the existing historic fabric, of which it was still very intact. In the first year of implementation efforts, the town mobilized dozens of volunteers in a grassroots effort to remake the public realm and the downtown. Citizens were directly involved in a series of hands-on projects that included redesigning the main street or the high street, pop-up retail stores, they redesigned public parks, and they did a restoration of the river that ran through the downtown. Within the last 18 months, all but one of the available buildings on Main Street has been purchased, which is amazing because it was pretty much completely empty when we were there, and most of them have undergone some degree of renovation. Recently, the county leadership had hired a consultant to do an assessment of the entire county, including Helper. And when he was talking about Helper in his presentation back to them, he said, "I've never seen a community like this. You guys are the poster child for how to get things done. We really believe Helper is setting the gold standard for Utah." So a pretty remarkable town. And just anecdotally, their success has led to Joel and I seeing a lot more applications from the state of Utah, because pretty much every small town in Utah now wants to replicate what Helper has managed to do in the space of 3 years. Moving on to my last case study, on the next slide, we're looking at East Nashville, Tennessee. In the early 1990s, East Nashville was referred to locally as the wrong side of the river. Urban renewal and the construction of an interstate highway had basically cut off that part of the city from the downtown and from the rest of the more wealthy city. East Nashville became known primarily as a poverty-stricken and crime-ridden place. On top of those existing issues, in April of 1998, a massive tornado with maximum sustained winds of 200 miles per hour swept through the city and pretty much leveled the East Nashville neighborhood, caused over $100 million in damage. After a year of what was described as agonizingly slow recovery progress, the city decided to host a DAT team to help build an overall recovery strategy and help move that process along. The initial public workshop was held in the neighborhood's public housing complex, and over 350 people participated, which was remarkable. But then by the final day of the process, over 1,000 people from all over the city turned up to hear the team's final recommendations. The DAT called for citizens to actively engage in revitalization efforts as opposed to passively sit by and allow the city to direct those. The team recommended reactivation of corner stores, so little markets and that sort of thing, which had been a very active part of the community historically. They, more importantly, recommended the creation of a nonprofit organization to bring together neighborhood leaders. That created an organization called the Rediscover East organization, and it was established to lead those volunteer efforts, to encourage that citizen buy-in. They planted thousands of trees, and they basically were serving as an advocate on behalf of the neighborhood interests. Today, again, if you've ever been to Nashville, you probably have been to the East Nashville neighborhood. It's a very, very different place. It's got a thriving community, thriving residential and commercial efforts there. And then on my last slide, I've presented some resources. The David Lewis film that was shown earlier is available on our YouTube channel. A lot of those case studies that I just mentioned also have videos that will do a much better job of what I just did in explaining what the story is. So we wanted to pop those up there in case anyone had any interest.
Thank you very much, Erin. Wonderful. We might unshare the screen, but if everybody's okay with this, I propose we move straight on to Jennifer so that we can have a bit of a conversation when Jennifer concludes. I'm just going to give a shout out to one or two people who I see are on the call today. We've got 3 chairs and former chairs of the Academy of Urbanism today, not only Kevin, but we've got David Rudlin and our current chair, Tony Reddy, and I think need to hear from comment at some point. Lots of other good friends as well. Robert Huxford, Janet Sutherland, David Lum, and just a shout out to Ignace Kaslaukas and Lucy Walwork. I don't know either of you, but you certainly share the prize for the best image when your video is muted, and Lucy's got a reference to a city I love, Moscow. Anyway, if you're good to go, Jennifer, please start, and then we'll take a few minutes so we can save enough time for the second part of the program, but have a discussion of some of these great questions that have been coming up in chat. Well, welcome, Jennifer. Hello, Jennifer.
Thank you. Sorry. I'm here from Baltimore in the USA and Maryland. I direct a community design center in Maryland. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the community design center model in Maryland, as well as share a case study to illustrate how we work. I'm going to share my screen right now. In Baltimore, the Neighborhood Design Center was founded in 1968 as a way to provide community design services directly to neighborhood initiatives. So our client is the neighborhood. We work on a pro bono basis for neighborhood associations and nonprofits in Baltimore's low and moderate income communities, or on contract on hire for agencies or nonprofits that want to facilitate a community-driven planning process or design process. We've done this for over 50 years. We've worked with over 3,000 community-based projects in Baltimore and Prince George's County. So the neighborhoods know us very well and know to turn to us when they want to do something either at the grassroots level that will be completely self-implemented, or they want to have a self-driven process where they bring agencies and developers and other partners to the table with them as the leader rather than vice versa. And we've done this because we feel that having the communities rebuild from the inside is really the way to change the system, that we are hoping to build new systems in Baltimore that undo structural racism and reboot the economy in a community-driven way. Today I'm going to share a little about Design for Distancing, which is the partnership that we're doing with the Baltimore Development Corporation, which is our quasi-government development corporation in the city, in order to reopen our small business districts, our high streets, to support small business during COVID. In order to make this project work, we have an incredibly fast timeline, which is really focused entirely on implementation, which is happening in the months to come. That work is, we've developed a program by which we held a very fast turnaround design competition that brought in over 160 ideas for how to reopen high streets during COVID-19 in a way that externalizes business practices while supporting safe social distancing. And from that, we've developed a guidebook, which you can find at designfordistancing.org. And then at the same time, we've worked together with 18 small business districts with funding from the mayor's office and the Baltimore Development Corporation to put in place pop-up interventions in 18 small business districts in the city, funded by BDC, but developed in partnership with those small business districts. So the small business district leaders and small business peoples have each been partnered with a design and a build team in Baltimore City who are listening to their needs and requirements, coming up with a design intervention and constructing that intervention all over about a 4-week time span so that small business can survive this situation. And we're also meeting people's daily needs. In order to assure that these plans meet a very, very high level of both safety and are implementable in a very speedy fashion. We put together a stakeholder team that includes global experts from the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health, all the agencies that would need to approve the plans, the designers and makers who would be constructing them, and business owners and the retail district leadership, all coming together to develop the design brief. And all of this is possible at such a high speed because NDC has been so embedded in Baltimore over our 50-year history. They all know us already, trust us, and know that we're there for them specifically rather than for the agencies or the developers. and know that we're going to have their best interest at heart and stand up for that best interest through the entire process. So right now, we're moving through the design review with the city. Because all of these projects are happening in Baltimore City's public realm, the city has developed a design review process that takes the position that these projects are by the city for the city, and so are doing an expedited review and approval. The design brief created design parameters where none of these projects would need utilities. They're really kind of in that parking day scale, but a little bit more than that so that it can last through the fall season. And so design review is happening this week and next. Construction on the ones that were approved this week will begin next week, and then the ones following will be happening in the couple weeks following, so that we'll have everything up in August. And NDC does this work for very critical underlying structural reasons that are prevalent in the United States. You know, we see Baltimore is a city that is over 2/3 African American, and yet our Black neighborhoods are suffering from incredible levels of poverty and disinvestment. And so this whole process is really designed to drive investment back into those neighborhoods, but in a community top sort of way, so that the community benefits directly from those investments. It's meant to address the fact that here's an example of one of the designs that we're working on with a group in Baltimore called Pickle, and all the places where you can find us. I'm sure if you just Google design for distancing, though, it'll all come up. And so, you know, it's really meant to focus on the fact that in the United States, African Americans and people of color and people of lower income bear the brunt of our environmental impacts. They bear the brunt of our digital divide. You know, right now we're all at home. Schooling is happening entirely at home this fall, and yet over 10% of people in Baltimore have no access to Wi-Fi, much less the technology to utilize that Wi-Fi. There are so many children here that have no ability to learn. We're all stuck at home, many of us in neighborhoods where the air quality is so poor that there's often a 20-year life expectancy difference between white neighborhoods and Black neighborhoods in Baltimore, even though they are less than 2 miles apart. The life expectancy in my neighborhood is 85. In Sandtown, it's 64. And those people live less than 2 miles away from me. And then finally, you know, these high streets, many people in Baltimore, over 25% of people in Baltimore live in a neighborhood with no grocery store, and over 40% of renters have no access to a personal automobile. So these high streets, and there's really no public transit, are the only way for people to feed themselves, to do their laundry, to visit the barbershop. You know, we're really functioning at a level where the high streets are meeting people's daily critical needs. And so this isn't about going to get a cup of coffee at Starbucks. It's really about meeting people's critical needs on a daily basis. And therefore, you know, are really about changing the system in Baltimore, not just about providing beautiful places, although we do that too. So I just want to thank you again for your time today. I look forward to sharing more about how we work.
Jennifer, thank you so much, and thanks everyone for doing their best to keep up to time. It's we've got a lot of colleagues today and a lot of ground to cover. So I'm very grateful for that. Could our 3 American colleagues and guests stay online here, please? And maybe, I mean, there's fantastic stuff coming up in chat. One of the words that comes up a lot that we would probably expect to see is trust. And I'm not actually going to ask you to talk about trust just now, because I think we'd like to hear from our UK speakers as well. Trust is a golden thread that runs through everything here. But maybe I could ask our three US colleagues to say something about the question that Kevin asked earlier on. Have you got an example of an early action, early win process that took things in the wrong direction, where you had to unpick it all? Was one question. The second one was from Ali Graham, city architect in Dublin. Hello, Ali. Lovely to see you here. It's important we hold leaders accountable to their language and the making of promises and the misappropriation of language. Can you say something about that in the US situation? And then finally, the comment that Michelle asked, what a US experience of playing these processes into regional issues as much as highly local issues. So don't want to finger anybody. Any of you can start, but I seem to be looking straight at you, Joel. So you'll do to start off with, but I do very much want to hear from Erin and Jennifer. And Jennifer, thanks so much. Love your work that you've been doing on the physical distancing, not social distancing for post-COVID. That's fantastic. And I'd love to share in more detail. I mean, I live and work in a city where we have the same kind of issue about life expectancy 2 miles down the road. It's not a racial divide that separates these communities, but the divide is no less great nonetheless. Anyway, regionalism, a wonderful piece of work that took the community in the wrong direction, and protecting the language. Go.
So I'll take on the going in a good direction or a wrong direction. The case that comes to mind for me is a small rural community that had this incredible community process there. They're in a rural state, so their public officials, their national public officials, were physically present with the community, with business leaders, with citizens during this process, which is highly unusual. We've had it, a handful of times in the hundreds of processes that we've done, where you actually have, the very leaders at the national level engaged at the local level with the community, and hundreds of people involved in this process in a community of only 2,000. So incredible energy and innovative thinking. And one of the things that they came up with was new federal regulations that allow you to tap into foreign capital by the folks who are not US citizens can contribute $1 million to a fund. It's called EB5, to a fund that allows them to gain citizenship privileges and fund something in a community that's needed. So they had a couple of business leaders that were able to mass an enormous, we're talking about billions of dollars to transform this place. And we had encouraged them to take an incremental approach, and they had done some great things incrementally, changing they had a rezoning process that actually had citizens sitting around a table talking about the need to change zoning to have front porches again. Great things like that. But this process, they decided, we're going to transform an entire block in the downtown and redevelop it with this money. And they demolished the existing fabric on their high street. And then a corruption scandal broke. Tied to this regulation, they're actually, those folks are going to jail now. The federal policy itself is in question because of this, and the town has a giant, like a bomb hit crater in its downtown where it used to have a functional street. So that's a dramatic instance of something going badly when you take the quick route, right? But we have another case study. It's a little bit older. We just put a film out about this last week. Boise, Idaho, that did something similar in the 80s. They were trying to attract at the time, shopping mall to their downtown, and they demolished 6 city blocks. And then the investor pulled out and said he wanted his mall in the suburbs. And so they had to rethink it. And you know, they brought in a team and came up with an urban design plan and a design to rebuild the fabric. And it took them 20 years to really have something there, as it does in every community. But today they're a thriving downtown. And it's about, you know, you have to continually assess where you are in these processes and refine how you approach implementation.
Yeah, unmute yourself, Brian. Erin, Jennifer, you want to say anything about these? I mean, there's such a richness in the questions in the chat, but I got to be mindful of time. We've got a lot of presentations and contributions to get through, but to the two of you, do something you would love to say right now, please do so. But otherwise, I'll move us on.
Well, Joel just stole my example, so I'll turn it over to Jennifer.
Oh.
I'm very curious to hear from the others. The place where we get pushed back the most usually is, you know, where there's so much contribution from the design team or the agencies that are going to fund it that it starts to lose its feeling of community ownership. There's a very specific, I think, aesthetic and level of action that needs to come directly from implementation by the community for the people that live there to still feel that it's their place. And so I think one of the places that I've gotten most sensitive is to really be a strong listener in all those situations and really stay tuned in on the community partners and notice when the hairs are starting to rise on the back of their neck because they feel like there's not enough oxygen in the room for them, or that not enough of their ideas are showing up on the paper, and where they'll start to shut down. They won't push back necessarily, but you can see a different look in their eye. And to really then say, let's pause, let's listen again for a while. Let's try again, and to really just be tuned in on their energy more than anything coming out of their mouth until the point where I feel that energy soften again, and then I know we're back on track.
Well, thank you very much, Jennifer, and your point about raising the hairs on the back of the head prompts me to use David Rudlin's question about success rate. I mean, for two reasons, because David's image seems to be a self-portrait where he appears to have captured his crazy hair standing on end with a sort of Einsteinian quality to it. But the question David asks is about success rate. And I think that begs a question really about doing research. So with your agreement, everyone, I propose to move on to the second part of the program now, because I think that particular question from David really does beg a question about research. And we will end this afternoon looking at particular examples from Charles Campion and Adam Birchall from Cornwall and from London, about the private sector involvement in charrettes, or a public agency or a governance body involved in driving things forward. But first of all, we're going to hear from two speakers briefly, and in a minute or two, Jazz Atwal, who many of us know extremely well. Jazz, I think, is building an incredible profile of events and participation in and engagement in the UK, built on her background in psychology and the psychology behind some of these things. Fascinating. But first of all, want to introduce one of our secret weapons here in the UK, Dr. Husam AlWaer from the University of Dundee. And I think specifically related to David's question about success, Husam with some colleagues from KMA were able to undertake research work for the Scottish Government about the importance of post-Charrette processes. And I think this is highly important. Are you good to go, Husam? And
yes.
We could, great. Well, please, whoever's sharing screens, please share the screen and let's see Husam.
Good afternoon, everyone. I will be brief, concise, and precise. What I am going to share with you is really representing the voices of practitioners and local communities group in Scotland. And it's kind of, you could say, an action research started in 2017, and it hasn't finished yet. We're still really doing a lot of pieces for it. Next slide, please. So this is some of the publications we did so far, and my colleagues, they will put the link for those publications in the chat box. But just I want to highlight, this is really coming through research between University of Dundee, Kevin Murray Associate, and my colleagues, Ian Cooper from Eclipse. Next slide. So what is important? There is still sometimes people, how can I say, perceive Charrette or any community design-led events as one, how can I say, one-off exercise. That's one thing. The second thing, some people, they feel Charrette is only about, how can I say, the physical built environment. So, but what the research show, it's no longer only about, how can I say, the built environment in narrow sense. It's really about, how can I say, in responding to stakeholders' needs. So you go to most of those Charrette, actually, they really tackle issue of health, well-being, jobs, accessibility, rehabilitations, and so on. Not only that, over time, they may involve really different stakeholders, groups. So some people now putting Charrette in the perspective of next 10, 20 years and 30 years. Also what we found it, yes, Charrette is part of any democratic setting, but democratic setting doesn't mean only listening to local voices. People want you to listen to their voices. Yes, that's true, but also they want you to act on them. They really want to see change over time and how you act to their, how can I say, needs and their aspiration in their places. There is a danger if we end up with plenty of talk or consultation, but no action. And that could be really a danger when it's come to issue of trust and faith in the process itself. There is a question as well on the initiator and who initiate the Charrette, and how that might affect and influence the outcome itself. But regardless who initiate the event, they need local stakeholders and local community buy into to what they need to be done. But vice versa as well, local community groups are expecting the initiators, whether local authorities, whether through community groups, whether private sectors or partnerships as well, to respond to their needs. So it is how the bottom up really meets the top down. They need to meet together and they need to work together. Next slide, please. There are some factors. Charrette is only as good as what happens after. So no longer, some people still perceive it is about the event itself. No, actually, it is part of a wider ongoing process, ongoing conversations with the community, because that's important in order to show them any progress you may have done or you may have not. So once the event is completed, the process is really far from over. And it is seen as critical that momentum is really sustained in order to respond to change. And momentum is kept through its completion. Tangible delivery and real follow-up is really our key. So there is a danger that you may have a successful event on the day, but those may risk a negative effect if non-delivery, which could lead to really to disillusion, even growing distrust in the system or sense of deflations or cynicism. So the hangover is really key. Over-promising sometimes in the design event and under-delivering is really danger. Back to what we said, a lot of talk, no action. And this is lead to what one of my colleagues said, that said charrette become really a ticking box exercise. This is quite original diagrams, which really shows, yes, if you look at the circle in the event, pre-event and post-event is really very key. Having said that, what affect the delivery itself need to start from when we start defining the brief, before we start the event itself. Now, what happened after the event is so crucial in the sense of who owned the event, who is the stewardship. And we found out there is no one party could own the charrette. There is no one part, no matter how influential. And activities arising from design-led events may need to be packaged up to really different kind of work streaming with well-defined core delivery groups, with activity chunked into separate schemes. So that's, we found it really quite crucial in terms of what happens, the handover event. Next slide. The next one, please. Now, what is the outcomes of charrette usually? We found out through studying there are three key components, or what I call it, outputs. There is the shared plan, which could be sometimes a series of visualizations, a wish list, and so on. But there is as well, importantly as well, the action program, which really highlighted the themes, the possible projects, but also what should come first, the quick wins, the next, and the more aspirational one, which might take 2 to 5 years. But also, there should be kind of delivery vehicles. This is quite crucial in terms of who is going to deliver what, where, when, and by whom. What kind of relationship should be between local authorities, private sectors, and community. That's, we call it the delivery vehicle, which should really show all those who should involve in the delivery mechanism. Next slide, please. This is as well, we really unpack in greater depth. This is in 2018 when we started the project with the Scottish government. Because yes, the literature shows there is a pre-charrette, charrette, and post-charrette, but we try to unpack it in greater depth. In what does that mean? I am not going to dwell a lot on the pre and the design, but as you can see in the pre-charrette, there are really three key components which really important if they have to inform the design event, but also the post-charrette. In the post-charrette, we found there are two key stages. One to do with the post-event engagement and the series of activities we should have, but also there is one called with aftercare. Last year, we worked with an extra project and back that in greater depth. Can we go to the next one, which I am going to highlight now, actually, just what happened in the post-charrette using that color. What we found interestingly from the Scottish perspective, that there should be what they call it delegating stage or transitional stage, which this might take, by the way, 1 up to 3 months, which really about transferring kind of the ownership of the post activities, especially as well understanding who is going to do what, who is responsible, and how to act upon them. So that's delegating stage is really so crucial, and especially when it's come to building trust and keeping the momentum. The next one, the green one, which is the post-event engagement. That's really very crucial in terms of explaining the progress has been made, or any obstacles or any delay and why, and how to inform and to refer back to the community. But more importantly, we found out achieving quick win, but that has to be part of a solid vision where all the communities and local stakeholders group buy into it. So quick in terms of early delivery is really very key to keep the momentum. The third one, we call it the aftercare or post-development stage. In here, you have the implementation group continue to meet regularly. Once a planned interventions has been completed, to focus its performance and to start if deemed appropriate, and possibly applying for further funding or even delivering further medium or long-term outcomes. And the last one, we found it rather aspirational, but we notice is really very key, especially to measure success and measure what has worked or what hasn't worked, the evaluation and re-evaluation and monitoring in order to check post-event activities remain on track or within the allocated budget or not, within the allocated schedules or not, and even evaluating the outcomes. So we're not trying to propose a linear framework because we are well aware there is no one-size-fit approach to Charrette. It's really different from one context to another. Next one, please. This is the final takes, the headlines. We found them really extremely useful which contribute to the success. One, the importance of really early. We shouldn't just focus on the post-Charrette. If we have to have a successful outcomes and delivery, early involvement of stakeholders is really very key. And the questions, how can I say bring those stakeholders? Who are they? How do we find them? And who is responsible to review the whole process? Collaborative working is long-term. It's not really short or medium-term. Stewardship cannot rest with a single hand, no matter how expert they might perceive. Capacity buildings is important, but this has to be started earlier in the process, in the pre-Charrette specifically. Delivery vehicle and the roadmap is really very important, but we have those activities need to package into different working streams because you may end up with different stakeholders with different experience, depends on the issues and the challenges. Having a plan in place combined with consensus on direction forward, that's really very key. I think Kevin highlighted a very, very important issues. Post-Charrette require different types of skills for delivery. Some of those to do with management and coordination, some implementation, some technical, but more importantly, some of them could be so emotional and require really psychological skills, communication, including digital skills. Delivery, we need to start really thinking about it right from the beginning. It is so worrying sometimes you bring those responsible for delivery late in the process, and making provision for follow-on on fundings, and also early delivering and action to achieve a quick win is really key to indicate that change is really actually happening and in the right direction. This will build confidence and trust in the process, but to do so, you need kind of monitoring and monitoring system for the delivery quality of decision and outcomes as a measure performance over time. And this really required solid key performance indicators. Thank you very much.
There's some really interesting observations coming through in chat, but I think what I'd like to do, I'm conscious of time, is to ask Jazz now to join us and go through her presentation. And then there's a couple of general points of discussion we might hopefully pick up before we move to the concluding section. Thank you, Jazz.
Brian. Okay, the focus today, next slide, sorry. The focus today is on what happens post-Charrette, but let's not belittle the buzz or lose sight of all the preparation and relationship building that takes place in the earlier stages. It takes months to generate. There is a skill to creating and facilitating interesting and experiential events which help to build trust in the process and longer lasting relationships. Next slide. Only by getting those early stages right will there be consensus, a shared plan which identifies and locks in key work streams for delivery, and traction with policymakers or those responsible for resourcing or funding bids. Next slide. So imagine you have been involved and engaged in the early stages. You've got the buzz. What next? Next slide. All of us are involved and come from different backgrounds, including planning and architecture, but also from health, education, youth work, leisure, arts and culture. This range of specialisms can be hugely beneficial to the outcome and delivery. It's not all just about design or planning. Next slide. In our approach and our place momentum approach, we also draw on other disciplines such as social theology and psychology, which is my background, coaching and mentoring. We play a detached role working with a range of designers, architects, planners, councils and developers. Next slide. We also have our own version of Arnstein's ladder of participation, which we follow through. Next slide. We use a wide range of tools and techniques depending on who the participants are, the stage of the process we're at, and the time available to us. Next slide. One of the most critical things in all of this, but in particularly in terms of taking work streams forward, is having the right balance of players involved in supporting the process, with the facilitator and designer acting as the glue between the different groups. The whole process needs a balance of input from diverse stakeholders and a commitment to act. Next slide. If there is an imbalance where one party or sector dominates too much, whether it be the developer, the community, or the council, it will be difficult taking the other parties along with you into the future. And that's why the balance of inputs is key and why the facilitation needs to be a trusted process. Next slide. Can you click again? Thank you. There are three critical pillars important to taking things forward in terms of delivery. These are a shared vision, action program, and a delivery vehicle or mechanism that keeps the players and those who need to commit to the plan working together going into the future. Next slide. Outputs of the process being taken forward can be conversations and stories. We often get a lot from that deep listening of lived experiences that people have and a better understanding of places and lives. It could be stories and themes, and it could be ideas, maybe as a wish list, but more likely it will be strategy and goals. If it's going to be something that can be carried forward into action, it's got to have identified projects and programs, maybe sketches and elements of a project brief. Next slide. Be clear in moving to the next stage. Have you got consensus and positive momentum behind this, particularly from the community? And have you got links to the policymakers and the agencies who may be responsible for delivering? Next slide. The inputs can shape the outputs. This is a project we worked on in Salford over a long period of time, over several years. Very rundown area, mostly council or housing association tenants, and parts of the estate were empty, boarded up, lots of crime and social deprivation in the area. But we took the community on a journey that involved us understanding their area from their point of view, the conversations, them taking us out on site to talk to the council, to talk to the designers and so on, and to help us understand how the neighbourhood works and what they would like to see out of it, including their own insecurities and concerns around being isolated, having their assets stripped, and how we could ensure confidence going forward. And we did that with a very transparent and open process. And as you can see, there was live drawing there. Next slide. So those were the inputs, but the outputs also included the development of the plan. You know, they talked about what they wanted to call it, and it was the best in the Northwest. We did very technical and very specific workshops around what their own homes might look like. And that image in the middle at the bottom is we took them on visits to places that the developer had already worked in, showed them actual homes that may be like the ones that they would be living in. And that development is now built out. It's almost completed. I don't think it's quite there yet, but those two images on the right show what it looks like now. Next slide. In North Berwick, they've undertaken some early action reasonably quickly. The proposed footpath widening and pedestrianisation of the high street, which is being piloted as a response to post-COVID recovery, is an example of that early action and confidence building and consensus building. Next slide. So the action programme is absolutely key for delivery. It's about taking all the inputs, processing them and structuring them into themes, actions and actors. Some of the actions may be spatial and some may not. The action programme is important to identify the parallel work streams, so different agencies and different groups can take ownership and see those through. Next slide. Making sure that after the charrette, there is some kind of capacity building, that the community don't lose their sense of belonging, ownership, involvement once the charrette is over. So again, this is from Lower Broughton, where we helped establish a community group. They chose and designed their logo. They were called the Lower Broughton Regeneration Partnership. They had monthly meetings where they invited, whether it's the council department that are responsible for waste and cleansing, or the police to talk about various bits of crime. Businesses came in to talk specifically about the concerns and issues they had. And it was an ongoing process that allowed the community to continue to have the conversations with the developers and the council and the housing associations. Next slide. So these are three types of outputs. Next. And these are some of the vehicles for delivery and mechanisms for delivery. The images on the right are for work we did in Warrington, Central Six Regeneration Master Plan that was very community involved, and it was adopted by the council just in March this year. Next slide. With the best will in the world and having done everything that theory tells us, there are still some risk areas. This process needs to be genuine collaboration. If it's false, for example, if key groups, be it developers or the council, walk away at handover stage, it will damage the whole process and will trigger a sense of deflation and create cynicism and distrust. Next slide. Can you click again, Rachel? Thanks. We need to have a well-organised charrette. It needs to be managed and thought through. We need to build a degree of consensus going forward. People have to be engaged in that consensus, being able to take it forward. We need to think in work streams, the what, the who, and the how. And we need to think about early actions in terms of building confidence and also to ensure that the motivation to stay involved and collaborate on the longer term, more costly, lengthy projects is sustained. And most importantly, we need to support each other. That's it.
Thank you very much, Jazz. I've been a long admirer of your ability to deliver a coherent and concise narrative through a sophisticated series of images. Well done. I greatly appreciate that. Thank you so much. Look, everyone, I'm conscious of time. I'm going to ask just one very brief question of Jazz and Husam. To you, Husam, I think the significant factor of your work is, does this give us, I mean, this is an enthusiastic and educated audience here today. Everybody will have participated in these processes in one way or another. Does your work give us empirical evidence to support, albeit from a study, a piece of research done in Scotland, to support many of the things that we all know, but we know implicitly? And a one-word answer will do, Husam. Is the empirical evidence there?
Yes, it is. Yes.
Thank you. Wonderful. And then, Jazz, to you, there's been quite a lot of chit-chat, not only about sociology and psychology, but psychiatry as well. Is that one of your skills? Because it seems to be that a number of colleagues feel a degree of need for that, not least your own business partner, who apparently needs this from time to time. Is that one of your many skills as well?
I do find I have to have my listening head on a lot. And actually, on a very serious point, I think that is critical to ensuring some of the success in this, that people do feel listened to and heard. So we can all listen, but are we really kind of hearing what people are saying? And it's going back to that kind of deep listening and taking on board people's lived experiences, which may be so different from your own, but having the capacity and the ability to be able to hear that and respond to it.
Thank you. Thank you both very much for those. I think the work, the research work is so important. It's just popped up again there in the chat. I really do think that research is incredibly valuable. Okay, I'm going to hand over now to Charles and to Adam to bring us home. Charles is affecting, for those of you from the UK, the Jurgen Klopp look. With his the effect of lockdown on his hairstyle. But anyway, Charles, if you would kick us off, please, and just hand straight into Adam, if you would.
Yeah.
Hopefully we might manage that and might manage to get 10 minutes at the end, which would be wonderful. Charles.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to be very quick. Thank you very much. I just want to say we're delighted to sponsor the event. Thank you for mentioning that at the beginning. And for mentioning David Lewis's passing, which, I was very lucky to have met him at one point, and his legacy lives on, not least in this event, but it will live on for a long time. And I'm delighted to partner with Adam from Cornwall Council. I'm going to be as brief as I possibly can, because I think his words will be more interesting than mine, given that he is responsible for delivery. And we hopefully set up this delivery process through our community planning work. I wanted to say quickly that the word charrette is, or community planning weekend, or whatever words that we use for these processes, means different things to different people depending on their experience. And I think we've seen the whole wide variety of co-design processes. But I think one of the key things about charrettes are their intensity, the focus, and the co-design element. And it's not just for the benefit of communities, but it's also for the benefit of the design team, for the client team. I think that's also really important. When they're well run and they're genuine, we all get a hell of a lot out of it. Next slide, please. And I think the values that we bring to it, it's always worth checking your sort of aims and values off against the International Association for Public Participation's 7 core values, which they put a lot of thought and time into and review from time to time. But these are worth checking out. Next slide, please. And I mentioned that there are lots of different sort of ways of running charrettes, and Jazz just showed quite a lot of different sorts and different clients and organisers or origins. This is a village doing it for itself, happens to be where I live, but it's low budget but very effective, and created a vision for the community through a quick intensive charrette process that was all encompassing and has been rolled out. There was no funding to deliver this, so that wasn't a goal as such. It was to get the community together and work out what they wanted from their place, and then a town team became the brief for the town team, and over the last 7 years it's being rolled out. Next, please. It could be a whole town renaissance strategy. There was funding in place, a lot of community animation at the beginning of the process, 1,000 people at a community planning weekend over the following 7 years through the town team process and bringing funding in, but more importantly to the public sector funding, the private sector funding, which sort of created a process, and this was happening all over Yorkshire. Next, please. Winchester, a controversial site, had been taken to court. The community had won. They were having demonstrated they were cock a hoop, and yet we still needed to create a brief for the site, supplementary planning guidance. Again, being very clear what the aim and goals of the project were. Next, please. And I think this is going to be Chorlington, a greenfield site, which was a former testing track for General Motors community planning process. The site should have gone back to greenfield. That was the original agreement, but actually with housing being in high demand, how could we create a new residential led development with a community trust, engaging the local communities through a charrette, again with a developer client, the follow-on process very, very much in people's minds. Next, please. And Nicholson Quarter in Maidenhead, very current. Again, a developer is going to invest hundreds of millions of pounds to tear down an internal shopping mall in the heart of a town centre and redevelop streets and squares and spaces and bring more residential into the city at a time when retail, obviously, as we know, and it's been accelerated through COVID, is changing its formats, engaging the community, but very importantly, building trust. And this is what our client Rob says all the time. This is about building trust and relationships with the community, getting local knowledge into the process, and also working out the communication strategy going forward, which has been incredibly important in this concept. Next, please. And we were asked last year to run a model charrette by the MHCLG, Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government. And Liskeard Cattle Market was chosen as the location, working with Cornwall Council. And through, again, a 5-day community engagement, focused, intensive process, bringing the whole breadth of the community in to talk about what was a very important area for them historically, a place where the community came together regularly, economic exchange, but also social exchange, and what should it be? I think one of there was a neighbourhood plan which had set a high-level vision, but the aim was to sort of set down a master plan, a visionary master plan. And the key thing that came out, next please, was that it should be a place for the community. It should continue to be a place for the community. Next please. And so we also had some kind of idea of funding going forward, and this was the first stage. I'm going to hand over now to Adam to tell you the rest of the story.
So, hello. So Adam Birch from down in Cornwall in the far south of the UK. So you may never have heard of Liskeard, but if you think of a small rural town in your own area, then you would be familiar with it. Liskeard has everything you'd expect a market town to have: a high street, it's pedestrianised street, a town hall, out-of-town supermarket, modern housing estates, council housing of various areas, a station, the doctors, and of course community leaders with a variety of views as to the future of their town. And so what does define Liskeard? Well, it's only a population of 10,000 people, but still serves a very large rural hinterland of parishes in the southeast of Cornwall. And they all look to it as a local service centre. It's got a station on the main line with half-hourly trains to major urban centres and all the way up to London. It's at the junction of a renowned little branch line down to the seaside resort of Loo, and just off a main trunk road. You might have noticed I called it a market town, but the one thing I've not listed it as having is a market. And indeed, it does not have a livestock market anymore. And so the town, I think, in a way, is still grieving that loss of identity. Even though it's probably not made a significant difference to the economy for a while, it was a key part of the town's identity and roots. And so that's where the story starts, really. The old cattle market site is exactly what it says on the tin. And I was reflecting on this, that it's owned by Cornwall Council, but belongs to Liscard. And it's always easy for large unitary authorities to have a sense of ownership and an asset that they have to get a return on. But actually, I always think that we are just the current custodians of sites that have come to us through a series of accidents. So it's a very important starting point that we think of it as Liscard's site, not Cornwall Council's site. So like many of these things, as Joel said earlier, it's been subject to several master plans. It's subject to a mix of views from Cornwall Council wanting a return from it, a local town that wasn't quite sure what it wanted from it. And so we were really lucky to be selected by the MHCLG process, and the charrette arrived at just that right moment to provide the clarity and vision that the site needed. The site did have some things going in its favour: clear ownership, existing strands of thought, a single site. And so what was needed really was bringing those strands together and critically then a route to delivery. There was nervousness, as we've heard throughout all of the talks today, amongst the community of yet another master plan. And so why was this different? And I think it was different because it provided that focus and clarity. It didn't let anyone off the hook in the community or the local authority or other stakeholders. So for those members of the community who are perhaps more doubtful, they had an imperative to be present. The charrette was about creating a buzz and excitement, active drawing and momentum, a moment, as Jazz said, and a peer pressure to be involved in a way. Be involved now or forever hold your peace. It created a moment to gather thoughts, get behind a vision. And so it's vital that both community and the council are both capable of being immobilized by options and indecision. But with the clarity from the charrette comes the obligation of delivery, a moral imperative to see it through. And at the heart of delivery was an acceptance of a series of principles. Really importantly, we were clear that it was not a normal regeneration project that would be delivered by a single business case. We wanted to allow for organicness and fluidity and identify deliverable projects, but within a framework for others to fit into, so it could keep evolving, because we knew that whatever we built in a normal sense would very quickly come out of date. So we wanted to make sure all those bits of the jigsaw would fit together, complementary uses with space to grow. And so into that space of clarity comes funding for demolition, funding for workspace elements, funding for artisan makers space, all perhaps serendipitous, but what the charrette provided was that framework, those moments where opportunities could be taken, but within accepted parameters. So there are still components left to come and to form, and that takes a degree of holding a faith within the council. But the charrette provides a container for that, while leaving space for the much more delicate elements like a new community centre to germinate and grow. I quite often say that in entering into this charrette, the council had to let go. It had to accept that what came out of the other end of the charrette would be the mandate that we all lived by. And the community had to make that final leap of faith too, to take that chance and opportunity. There were little bits of luck and judiciousness along the way. We were able to make the case to buy a little key corner of the site at the entrance, which a derelict garage, which my former property colleagues finally convinced them I was mad. I was supposed to be rationalising the estate, and here I was buying derelict garages. But it was so important just to remove little areas of uncertainty and doubt. And so progress, we're planning now, detailed planning for the workspace scheme, which is the image that Charles has got on the screen as the background there. The artisan maker space, shipping container based use, has just got its funding in the last 24 hours. And so the journey has started. And as many speakers have said, we are just looking at a small window on a much longer journey with a long history and a long future. And I think there was a sort of pre-question about material consideration, or the status of the Charrettes as a material consideration in the context of UK planning. And we, the bit of the council I sit in, we bridge between the local planning authority and its regulatory duties and a deliverer in terms of bringing sites forward. And so we have given the Charrette the status of a material consideration by consent of the LPA, but also the council as landowner, accepting that it's a guiding star for the future of the site. But in other jurisdictions or other administrations or other circumstances, the most important thing, I think, is its consultative weight. But that consultative weight comes from being having delivery as an integral part. So just summing up in the last sentence, really, our charrette for the cattle market was as much about the tools that would make the thing deliverable as much as what the thing was. So there you are. Thank you from the far southwest.
Thank you very much indeed, Adam. Oh, and look, here's an image just reminding us all that a lot of this has been captured by Jürgen Klopp. Sorry.
Move on.
On his in his book. Look, we've done pretty well. We're nearly on time. I'd hoped we might have managed to get to the end with a big, with an opportunity for quite a bit of chit chat. I'm going to ask each of the speakers to say one sentence about trust, about the importance of trust to you. If you're not sure what to say, don't say anything. Don't waffle, please. But I think it's a theme that runs through everything. While you're thinking about that, let me just tell you that thanks to our wonderful colleagues in the Academy, Heather and Rachel in particular, there will be an edited and typed up version of the chat from today available, and it'll be sent to all participants who've logged on with their email. I think it's been a very rich experience there. Now I'm going to go around. Joel, a sentence on trust.
I think participation is the path to trust, and trust is the path to relevance.
Thank you. My goodness, you can come back anytime. Erin, Jennifer.
I think that trust is the reason why any of our processes will succeed. I think the processes that don't succeed are because of a lack of trust.
I'm so glad this is being recorded. These are marvelous. Jennifer.
Trust is the ground. Trust is the ground by which our work happens.
I'm going to get choked up in a minute. This is marvelous. I'm going to write this all down and start using it in my presentation. Husam.
Trust, yes, about two things fundamental. Knowing how to listen to people, but also how to act on their aspiration and on their needs.
Good man, thank you. Jasmine.
I think I would probably just echo what I've said before, that trust has to be earned. It doesn't just come. So some of the short projects that we do doesn't necessarily mean that people will buy into it. So I think trust is something that we have to work hard at, whoever we are, particularly if it's a community that feels disenfranchised or disabled in some way.
Thank you, Jazz. Adam.
So it's about responsibility, the responsibility to hear as well as listen.
Fantastic, fantastic. And Charles?
Yeah, I think building on that we're servants of the community. We're nothing if not that, and I think we will have to take that responsibility very seriously and work our hardest. And we have different talents, but we can all be out there and be accessible. And yeah, I mean, the Maidenhead project, I know the developer there talks about Charrettes as the word he uses is trust. It's about being prepared to talk to people, sometimes have difficult moments, but take people with you through on a journey, and trust is key to that.
Thank you so much. And I do hope, I mean, I think that was marvelous, and I think we will type that up and add that into the chat at the end. It really just behoves me now as chair to do some thank yous to everybody. I've not had the opportunity on this to finger, as is my wont in the role of chair, friends and colleagues, but our speakers have done such a fantastic job today. May I, in wrapping up, may I just say one thing from the presentations of Charles and Adam at the end, that something when we were preparing for the event that they both made is that Charles made a very telling point about working with the private sector, where the outcome of the charrette is not really in doubt, but the involvement of the community's voice is very important if there's a lot of developers involved in the process. I hope that's come through, as indeed some of the other things did earlier on. The importance of having a senior officer like Adam committed to a program like this, where the authority knows what it wants to do, but is embracing the charrette and the engagement process as the means by which to achieve it. Really incredibly important. I need to thank the Academy that many of us worked so hard to get up and running. May I just mention one or two things for those of you who don't know, that there is a weekly Urbanism lunch hour, takes place every Fridays at 1 p.m, which is a great way to hook in and get ready for your your physically distanced weekend, to listen into the latest thoughts and topics from the Academy. The future events from the Academy, including Build Better, Live Better, delivering affordable homes now, on 2nd of September, will include national and local authority policies, community-led affordable housing models from across the 4 nations of the UK and in Europe. And of course, please do keep up to date with the Academy's website, where you will see many events coming up over the next few weeks and months. Could you all, if there's a way to do so on Zoom by the little, we should really all be able to switch on our microphones with a round of applause, it seems to me at this point, joining me in wishing all of our speakers so much thank yous, really, for attending to the topics, the interest, and thinking about 5 slides in 5 minutes and making it such a rich process. Thank you all so very much. As I said, I would like to thank the colleagues in the Academy, and in particular my colleague at Glasgow School of Art, the research assistant for the Academy, who will tidy up this event, reduce the amount of my talking head, I fervently hope, and edit the chat together and provide that chat to everybody. So thank you so much. Look forward to seeing you all in an Academy event very soon. And just before I sign off, Rachel, have I missed anything? Or Stephen, anything obvious I should have said in my thank yous? Oh, and of course, Charles, forgive me. Huge thanks to JTP for sponsoring the event. And joking apart, please, everybody, if you don't have a copy, do get a copy of 2020 Visions. It's very insightful, as indeed is a lot of the information that is published by the AIA in the United States. Great idea to have the AIA and the AOU together. And thank you so much to our American colleagues for getting up half an hour before they went to bed in order to be able to join in the conversation today. You were all on the call earlier than anybody else, and organized with that amazing efficiency that is so characteristic of Americans. Well, I'll talk us out. There's 21 new messages appeared on my chat room, and I don't have the opportunity to go through them all, but I think everybody is generally saying that they've had a good time, which is good news. Wonderful to see you all. See you here on an Academy event very soon. Pull the plug, Rachel, or I'll keep talking.
Thank you.